Thank you so much, Miriam, for that very, very special award. It's good to see so many friends, and it's great to be back together with the Israeli-American Council. Sheldon and Miriam are national treasures. Your generosity and passion for good causes in the U.S. and Israel is admired by so many. This organization is another example of your contributions, and please let Sheldon know we miss him. As everyone here knows, Israel is in the midst of an election. That's the beauty of an actual functioning and healthy democracy. Can you imagine if such a genuine election took place in Syria or Iran? Brutal dictators fear the voices of their own people. In Israel, there's no shortage of voices. And those voices can be quite loud. But that's the greatness of the Israeli spirit. At the United Nations, we had to sometimes get loud too. Shortly after the 2016 election, when President-elect Trump asked me to be his ambassador to the United Nations, I told him, you know I'm not going to be a wallflower or a talking head. I need to be able to say what I think. Without any hesitation, President Trump said, Nikki, that's exactly why I want you to do this. President Trump was true to his word, and I was true to mine. It was the honor of a lifetime to serve the country I love so much and work with a president who allowed me to do my job. I've been out of the UN for about 2 months now, and I've got to say it feels pretty good to be a private citizen again. After 8 years of being on call 24/7, I don't have to wear body armor every day like I did, but I will always stand up for America, always. I've had some time to reflect on the experience. I believe very strongly that the Trump administration has gotten most of the important questions right in the Middle East. The two biggest ones were the correct decision to get out of the Iran nuclear deal and the courageous decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. These decisions and others came about because he had the willingness to challenge concepts and customs that have gone unchallenged for far too long. That's something that's very unusual in government. The bureaucracy is very strong, and it always pushes towards continuing the status quo. It takes real leadership to challenge it. Just about 1 month before I arrived, the previous administration had allowed UN Security Council Resolution 2334 to pass. Among other things, this was the resolution that condemned Israeli occupation of the Jewish quarter of the Old City of Jerusalem. It was a shameful day for America. The U.S. had refused to stand up for our friend at a time when Israel needed us the most. My first ambassadorial meeting was with the Israeli ambassador, Danny Danon, and I promised him, under my watch, that would never happen again. And I'm proud to say that it did not. As many of you know, one of the UN agencies with the worst track record of Israel bias is UNESCO. Among many other ridiculous things, UNESCO has the outrageous distinction of attempting to change ancient history. UNESCO declared one of Judaism's holiest sites, the Tomb of the Patriarchs, as a Palestinian heritage site in need of protection from Israel. That was enough. Shortly after, the United States withdrew from UNESCO. And then there was the United Nations Human Rights Council, the name that's right out of George Orwell. There is very little of the Human Rights Council that is actually dedicated to human rights. When I became ambassador, Venezuela, China, and Cuba all sat on the council. It should be no surprise that in the 10 years from 2006 to 2016, the Human Rights Council condemned China exactly 0 times. It condemned Cuba 0 times. It wouldn't even hold a hearing on Venezuela. It did get around to condemning the criminal Syrian regime 6 times in 10 years, and the North Korean dictator 9 times. But do you know how often it condemned Israel in that same 10 years? 68 times. Now, no country is perfect, but Bashar Assad tortures his own people and attacks them with barbaric chemical weapons. You're going to tell me that Israel, a bastion for human rights in the Middle East, should be condemned 10 times more often than Syria? Well, that sums up the UN Human Rights Council. We spent a year trying to fix it. Some of the pro-human rights countries joined us. They were embarrassed by the council, but they refused to do what was necessary to change it. And yet they still insisted that the United States needed to stay on the council because we were the last shred of accountability. And to that I said, that's exactly why America needed to leave. It's very important to recognize American strength in the world and where it comes from. Yes, we have a powerful military and a powerful economy, but a large part of our strength comes from our values. The rest of the world looks to America as being the moral compass in the world. When America chooses to be part of an international organization, we make that organization respected throughout the world. And when we choose not to take part, we send a powerful message to the rest of the world. Last year, the United States became the first country ever to resign its seat from the Human Rights Council. It was the right thing to do. We will always fight for human rights. That's who we are. That's what we do. But we can only do that more effectively without having to be a part of an organization that doesn't even represent its name. Every month at the Security Council, there is a session devoted to the Middle East. And every month, this session becomes what I call, you've heard me say it, an Israeli bashing session. This has gone on month after month for decades. This was news to me when I arrived, and I was truly shocked. I came out of the first session and publicly said, if we want to talk about security in the Middle East, we should talk about Iran, or Syria, Hezbollah, or Hamas, ISIS, or even the famine in Yemen. There are about 10 major problems facing the Middle East, and Israel has nothing to do with any of them. So in protest, every month in the Middle East session, I spoke about something other than Israel. I can't say that we solved the problem, but I can say that several other countries followed our lead. What used to be a monthly Israel bashing session now at least had more balance. Another area where we changed the status quo was with the UN agency dedicated to providing social services to Palestinian refugees. You would know it by its acronym, UNRWA. We should all sympathize with Palestinian children who live in terrible circumstances. I visited some of them in a camp just north of Bethlehem. They deserve a good education, just as much as any other children. The question is whether UNRWA will ever be able to provide it. As many of you know, for 70 years, UNRWA has defined refugees in a way that their numbers grow larger and larger. No other refugees in the world are counted that way. They also promote the so-called right of return, knowing it would completely destroy Israel. We had a lot of concerns about UNRWA, and then we looked to see who was paying the bills. Since UNRWA's founding, the U.S. had donated $6 billion. By 2017, we were up to donating $400 million a year. That's far more than any other country, including the wealthy Arab countries that blame the U.S. for not doing enough and claim to support Palestinians. We said, enough is enough. We ended the U.S. funding to UNRWA. Now, what's important to know is that the dire threats we were warned about never happened. Many people and leaders in our own national security bureaucracy told us that if we pulled funding from UNRWA, the schools would close and there would be a new wave of terrorism. Some of us thought that was wrong. UNRWA always uses the threat of school closings to shield themselves from having to actually balance their budget or make good policy decisions. In the end, not a single school closed for a single day, and U.S. taxpayers are no longer on the hook. The same sort of sky is falling arguments were made when the president made his decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and actually move the embassy. This was a courageous and right decision, but it did not come without criticism, both around the world and in the administration itself. The Defense and State Departments, as well as our intelligence agencies, warned that if we did this, there would be massive protests and violence throughout the Arab and Islamic world. There was no way to guarantee that that was wrong. It could have happened. But that's what the bureaucracy always says when you consider doing something that goes against the status quo. Real leadership makes its own assessment of the risks and realizes that change will never happen if we base our decisions on fear. The president made the bold and right move, and guess what? The sky didn't fall. It's still up there. And life went on. Of course, it did cause quite a stir at the United Nations. In the Security Council, almost exactly 1 year since the passage of 2334, when the United States abstained, I had the great honor of casting my first American veto. The next week, the Jerusalem issue was brought before the full UN General Assembly of 193 countries. We lost that vote, but to many people's surprise, 65 countries refused to vote against us. In the long history of the UN's mistreatment of Israel, that was a record. And we never forgot that vote. We were taking names. This led to a discussion I had with President Trump and the national security team about drawing a closer connection between how much the United States gives in foreign aid and how countries vote in the UN. UN votes should not be the only factor in our foreign aid decisions. We have many interests that go beyond the UN, but they should be one factor, and the administration is determined to start making that connection. A perfect example is Pakistan. We were giving $1 billion a year to their military. Not only do they oppose us most of the time at the UN, they were harboring terrorists who were killing our US soldiers. We don't give that aid to them anymore, and the president put a stop to that too. Some people accuse us of favoritism towards Israel. First of all, there's absolutely nothing wrong with showing favoritism to an ally. That's what being an ally is all about. But it's not really about favoritism. It's about values. Values of life, family, freedom, and democracy. It's about treating Israel like any other country. It cannot be the case that one country in the world doesn't get to choose its own capital city. It cannot be the case that the Human Rights Council has a standing agenda item for only one country. It cannot be the case that only one set of refugees throughout the world is counted in a way that causes the number to grow forever. It cannot be the case that in an organization with 193 countries, the United Nations spends half of its time attacking just one. And you know what? That demand is actually a demand for peace. The UN's bias against Israel has long undermined peace by encouraging an illusion that Israel will just eventually go away. Israel's not going away. Israelis are fighters. They fight for their voice, their security, and their freedom. I think that little country has done pretty well showing her strength. When the world recognizes those realities, then peace will be possible. It becomes possible because all sides will be dealing with realities, not fantasies. And when we deal with realities, then reasonable solutions can be found. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here, to be a part of the IAC that does so much work in Israeli causes. But I want to thank you mostly for using the power of your voice. There is nothing better than Americans who use the power of their voices on behalf of good causes. That's what the Israeli American Council is all about. And it's been great to be with you again. I may not be at the United Nations anymore, but I will never stop fighting or telling the truth for what I believe is right. God bless you. Thank you very much.